When was a time that a gut instinct probably saved your life? I volunteered as an EMT in a small village just outside NYC as a senior in high school and my first few years of college. This night we were on call for not only our town, but the surrounding two villages, who were out of service. One of the villages isn't exactly the best neighborhood. Now, generally we always have a police officer on every scene we go to just because they can always get there faster. This time around, though in this bordering village, there was a fire on the other side of town and some sort of crime investigation elsewhere. Basically PD resources were stretched thin. A call came in for a 25-year-old male with a facial wound at a private residence with instructions that the patient was in the backyard. We were dispatched and told that there was no PD available and no advanced life support ALS available. It was just me and my driver. Note, this is standard in most agencies. It just felt very unnerving for me. So we get on scene and it was an apartment building with an open yard in the back that we could drive onto. My driver pulls onto the field and he sees the patient sitting in the shadows as though he was hiding. Something felt off and that feeling prompted me to hit the floodlights on the ambulance, illuminating most of the yard. The moment the lights came on, we saw 5 to 7 men with tire irons and baseball bats standing in what was once pitch blackness. My driver hit it in reverse and we got the hell out of there. I got on the radio and called for immediate assistance. Turns out those guys were planning on jumping us, stealing the narcotics from the ambulance, and taking the rig for a joyride. Poor planning really, because we don't carry narcotics on a basic life support ambulance. To this day I fear what would have happened if we had just walked up to the patient. Last summer, after I had gotten out of the shower and climbed into bed, I had this overwhelming feeling that I should deadbolt the door. So I got up and walked the length of my house, completely naked, and locked my side door. By the time I had gotten back to the bedroom and turned off the lights, someone was at the door, trying to kick it in. I called 911 and had a 3-minute response time, but the guy got away by running into the field behind my house and he disappeared. The police on the scene told me that they suspect that it was the same guy that had broken into other area houses and had assaulted and raped an elderly woman only a few days before. We bought a shotgun a few weeks later. Was walking home by myself one night years ago. Being the naive 15-year-old girl that I was at the time, I wasn't really worried about walking by myself so late at night. These two guys were walking down the road towards me. They were talking to each other and just walking. They didn't look at me, say anything that I heard, or make any kind of movement that would indicate they were anything more than just two people on their way home. I got to the corner of my street and they were just across the road, perhaps 15 feet away. My street only has a sidewalk on the one side, the side they were approaching. Suddenly I just got this awful sinking feeling in my stomach and something told me to run. I didn't run because I immediately reasoned I was being crazy, but I did turn immediately down the side of my street with no sidewalk, walking as quickly as I could. After a moment I looked back at the two men. They had stopped at the corner, were perhaps 20 feet away from me now, and were clearly having a quick and intense conversation. My heart was pounding at this point. I turned around and kept walking fast, looked back again. They had crossed the street and were following me. I live on a dead-end street. The only reason to be on it is if you live there. So I started running. Lucky for me, I have long legs and have always been a good sprinter. Also, fortunately, my house was not very far down and I was quickly in my driveway and pulling out my keys. I opened the door and was stepping into the house when I looked behind me again. They were standing at the end of my driveway. They looked at me, turned and walked back the way they had come. Perhaps reasoning that no teenager would live in a house by themselves, and obviously I had parents who would have heard me scream at this point. I still shuddered to think about what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and turned early instead of walking within arm's reach of them. Freshman year of college, I was supposed to meet with a professor after class one morning to talk about switching my major to his field, materials engineering. Early in the morning of the meeting, I emailed the professor to cancel, mostly because I didn't think I would actually like engineering and was just doing it because it seemed prestigious. I went to Virginia Tech. I would have been in Norris Hall during the shooting if I'd kept that appointment. About 9 years ago, my engine died on the Florida Turnpike on my way to a family event. I was waiting for when an older man with more nostrils than teeth pulls up in a dumpy, unmarked pickup truck offering to help. I got that funny I'm in danger feeling, so I kept the windows up and the doors locked and told him AA was on their way. He told me through the window that AA wasn't coming and he was sent instead. He told me to pop the hood, which I did, as I redialed AA to confirm. I was still going through prompts on the phone when he came back to my window and told me there was blue stuff all over the engine. He told me to come out and take a look. I said that I appreciated his help, but I'm on the phone with AA and they're sending someone else out and to take care and have a good day. All the while my hands are trembling and I'm as close to pants shitting as I have ever been. He lingered a while before driving off. When I was finally connected to someone at AA, they told me, as I suspected, my tow truck had not been canceled and they'd be there soon. When AA got to me, two things happened. One, the driver said, "Oh, you're hot," when I stepped out of my car, leading me to think I might be in danger again. Two, I looked at the engine and there was nothing blue anywhere. To this day, I still remember peering at that scary old man's gums through my window and thinking I didn't want his mouth to be the last thing I ever saw. A few years ago, a few guy friends and I had a guys only vacation from our girlfriends and wives in Florida. We went down to the Keys and camped, snorkeled, went boating, all that touristy crap. After almost a week of doing all that, we got bored with the designated snorkeling areas and decided to find a less populated and more interested area to snorkel. We ended up finding some saltwater marshes in a national park, walked around the edges until we found a dilapidated and collapsing tower near the water, maybe an old lifeguard tower. No swimming signs were everywhere, but being a bunch of drunk dudes, we decided to jump off the tower and into the water. No big deal. Jumped off a few times, swam around a bit. After a bit, everyone else was saying they wanted to stay in the marshes and swim around and explore a bit. I just didn't have a good feeling about how murky the water was and how nobody else was around. Everyone else wanted to do it, and in a way I did as well, but regardless, just had a gut feeling. Eventually, after some arguing, I told them they could go ahead, but I was going back to the bar street to party. For whatever reason, they decided that was a better idea and we all left. It was only a few days later that we were leaving the campsite that we ran across a ranger and had a conversation with him. Ended up chatting about the marshes and how we jumped in a few times. All of a sudden he got intense and his eyes got wide. Turns out those marshes were off limits because they were absolutely infested by saltwater crocodiles and, to a lesser extent, sharks. It was actually a tourist destination simply because they were so commonly seen there. If we swam there and left shore, I don't know what would have happened. That water was so murky that you could scarcely see a foot in front of your face, and there were 11 of us. I don't know that any of us would have been seriously hurt or killed, but I wonder what would have happened. That also marks one of the few times that I didn't follow through with a sketchy plan, so I'm proud of it. I was walking home from a restaurant with a carry-out box of food for family dinner. I was 13 at the time, and I see this black van ahead. I lived in a fairly affluent area, and I was used to seeing similar vans like this. Landscaping companies drove them. The only thing that stuck out at me was the fact the windows were tinted and the hood had no logo on it. I didn't think much of it, but I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was an old lady, walking one of those Chinese crested terriers, the ugly kind with no fur. "Hey, do you know where Bulrush Court is?" she asks. I point out the street and start to walk home. The van is now gone, having made no sound. "I actually just wanted you to not go near that van. I felt uneasy with you walking home so late at night, girl," the lady called from behind me. I shrugged and thanked her, parting ways. Turns out a van matching that description was being driven by a known sex offender. I owe that lady. I still live in the area, and haven't seen her or her dog since. One night near the end of my last semester at college, I had a rough draft due for a bullshit technical writing class. For some reason I had serious writer's block, probably because the assignment is idiotic. I don't know why, but I got this sudden feeling of forget it, it isn't important, just sleep in tomorrow. I mean, I had feelings like that before, but never this strong, and I rarely gave in to them. The next morning, the building I would normally cut through every Monday and Wednesday morning, after printing something in the library to get to the tech writing class, had a guy show up at about that time and kill 32 students. My desire to slack, watch TV, and stay in my warm apartment steered me clear of the Virginia Tech shooting. Between that and the crazy situation with grades that happened afterward, I carry a couple of different kinds of guilt about it. Back in September of 2000, I was allowed to go to kindergarten a year early. I was born on September 8, 1995, just a few days past the cutoff date. But they made an exception for me because I already had a second grade reading level if my parents homeschooled me for it. My 5th birthday was coming up, and my little brother was almost 5 months old at the time. My parents had given me one of my presents a few days early, my very own digital clock. I was very excited about it because I was learning how to tell time, and it was one of my favorite things at the time. This day, my mom needed to run across the street to help our elderly neighbor with something. She plopped my little brother into his high chair, told me she'd be back in 5 minutes. I excitedly nodded my head and left. I carried on playing with my toys. Just a little while after she left, I heard a loud crash. I freaked out, thinking my brand new clock had fallen on the floor, and began to run to the stairs to go up to my room and check. Something didn't feel right, though, so I quickly decided to look in on the kitchen. I still remember the feeling of absolute horror I felt at that moment when I saw what was going on. My little brother had been trying to rock his chair, and caused it to fall over backwards. It had landed on a small fence-like thing that divided the kitchen from the drop-off into the family room below. I live in a split-level house, and it was slipping fast. Without thinking, I threw myself under it to try and stop it from falling anymore. It worked, but now I was pinned against the ledge since I wasn't strong enough to push it back up. I had no way to free myself, so I just started to scream bloody murder and hope it was loud enough for my mom to hear. My mom heard me and came running, pulling the chair off of me and making sure we were both okay. My brother was just shook up, and after a little while my back stopped hurting. My brother decided that that was the perfect time to say his first word. Years later, when I was older and could understand some things better, I realized that if I hadn't looked in the kitchen and held that chair up, my brother could have been horribly injured. Was under 10 years old and traveling with my grandparents in the South as I did every summer. Don't remember what state we were in, but we stopped at an ice cream parlor and sat down to eat it. We had barely started eating when I got a really uneasy feeling and told them repeatedly that I wanted to leave. I got so upset that I started crying. I guess they thought I was just tired, throwing a fit, so we left and continued to our hotel for the night. Took a couple hours to get there. Turned on the TV in the room, and the ice cream parlor town we were in had been leveled by a tornado. When I was 8, my mom and her husband were arguing, but it didn't feel like their usual spats. There was just this quality to his voice that made my stomach flip, and I started shaking without fully understanding why. I grabbed the phone, but then froze. I stared at this man that was screaming at the top of his lungs at my mom, and I had no idea what the fuck to do. He raised his arm like he was gonna hit her. I got in the way. He hit me instead. My mom flipped the fuck out. I started crying and dialed 911. He then grabbed a goddamn knife and chased my mom around the house with it. I hid in the bathroom, panicking and telling the dispatcher to help. My mom's husband was gonna kill her. He ran out not long after that. Not sure if this falls under gut instinct, as it's kind of common sense to stop a fight from escalating. But that's the best I got. Wake up one day, shortly after graduating high school. Immediately call a friend to grab a coffee and go on a burn run. Hopped out of bed and headed for the shower, which was located immediately across the hall from my bedroom. I was still living with my parents and was usually adamant about shutting and locking the bathroom door when I was in there. Today the house happens to be empty, and while I did think about shutting the door, something inside me tells me I should leave it open this time. Halfway through my shower, I start smelling burning plastic, smoke. I jump out of the shower, grab a towel, and walk out of the bathroom to find my bedroom engulfed in flames. The state fire investigator issued his report 2 months later, stating there was not enough evidence left in the room to officially declare a cause of the fire. But unofficially, he told my parents he believed that an electrical fire started in the wall and traveled incredibly fast throughout the room. He, along with many other firefighters then and since, told me that if the bathroom door hadn't been left open, the smell of the fire may not have reached me until it was too late. I was running down a mountain with my friend, trying to race him back to the campsite. I was almost finished winning the race and just had to climb over these waist-high barriers. Instead of stopping and just climbing over like I normally would have, I jumped as hard as I could about 5 feet back from the barrier. I barely made it over. When I looked back to brag about my victory, I noticed that my friend was standing almost completely still and slowly circling around the fence towards where the entrance was. Seeing the fear in his face, I looked down and realized that about to end a half feet in front of the fence was a very pissed off rattlesnake.